So for those of you who might be watching on the recording and don't know me, I'm Tim Pestell and I'm Senior Curator of Archaeology here at the castle, and I've been the interpretation lead on the project since it started. And what I'm going to do today is take a very quick spin through some of the recent work that's been achieved within the keep, as well as talking about some of the thinking behind the interior fittings that we are creating to go into the keep itself. So I'll start off by reminding people of how we used to have to try to get across what the internal spaces and decoration of the keep might have looked like by using things like digital imagery, some of which were more effective than others, and some of which were slightly more fanciful than others. But this particular example shows how the spine wall that we know from the open arcade that Boardman put in was originally solid, and that there was a mezzanine level at the west end of the Great Hall of the keep. But the challenges in interpretation for the internal spaces of the keep, which we know a lot of people were interested in and understanding better, our visitors, were really highlighted when we went to Dover, when we saw how they had reconstructed the interior spaces of the keep there using late 12th century styles of furnishings and furniture. And so we took that as the starting point for how we'd like our own keep to look, dating it to the earlier 12th century. And as part of the project that we've been working on for Royal Palace Reborn, there are a number of areas that we've been working on. So, for instance, the roof platform that is going to go at the top, at the battlements the battlements level of the building, is now going ahead. So here we have one of the doors on the roof that will take you out from the lift shaft and staircase that are going up through the keep roof. And this is the view down from the staircase that you get as you walk all the way up and can now go through that roof line. And one of our very proud workers who is standing on the new staircase, and you can see one of the trusses in the background. So this is at the west end of the keep on the south side, and it shows you this new sort of floating staircase that is going through. And we've got here a graphic of where the staircase goes up to the Bygard Tower. And this staircase is actually not only being reconfigured at the bottom, and we can see the staircase where it's been swung through 90 degrees from the original Boardman layout at the bottom, but the two series of stairs that go up to the actual Bygard Tower, you can just about see from this graphic, have got glazed roofs going in. And that has necessitated taking off the old roof and before the new roof goes on, because it's raining outside, we're having to have a temporary roof put in so that all the work can go on indoors in the dry. You also saw on that graphic the location of the bridge that is linking the keep from the Percival, and which will provide a level platform for people who find it hard to walk upstairs, or who are in a wheelchair, or have pushchairs and buggies to be able to get across from the Percival into the keep itself. And this has involved opening up the doorway through the arcade wall, and this is the bridge as it looks from the inside, which is not too dissimilar to the graphic that we were initially presented with by the architects. And this is what it looks like as of a few days ago, with the new oak framing that goes through on the inside of the ribs and is really quite elegant, I think. We've continued to make new discoveries in the fabric as well. And so on the left-hand side, you can see there's actually a very weathered and worn graffiti of the crucified Christ. You can just about make out the body and the arms raised up, as well as one of the legs bent at the bottom, and a daisy wheel. And these were found in what's going to become the buggy store, which was one of the dungeons in the bottom of the keep on the south side. So the keep continues to reward a close investigation of the fabric, just to keep in mind that there's lots of new things that we don't know about the building, which we're still trying to tease out. And as a reminder, this is what we presented to the lottery initially as the design for the interior of the Great Hall of the Keep, what it might look like when the building project was finished. And this, with a little bit more building material stacked up in the foreground, is what it looks like at the moment. So you can see the walls going in within the spine arcading, and also the mezzanine level, which we know archaeologically once existed, where it's been put in now. We've got a few more graphics to show you the layout of things like the tables. One of the key elements for sustainability for the service is making us able to offer more for things like evening hire. And a key element is getting 200 covers within the Great Hall, which takes us beyond what a lot of other places for hire can offer. And this is how they'll be arranged. And then the graphic representation of how the internal rooms will look within the principal floor. And so in particular, you have to the top the mezzanine level with the Great Hall mezzanine floor at the very top. And then you see mezzanine floors on the south side, which you can see laid out with balustrading that goes around the King's Chamber. And the bottom graphic shows you a bit more clearly the King's Chamber at the bottom, the chapel to the right, and at the top of that particular graphic, the Great Hall. And then, of course, you've got the bridge coming in, and it really helps to show how we have this vestibule at the end of the bridge. So if you've come across on the bridge, you get the same introduction to the building and to the Great Hall before you go in that you do if you go in the correct way, which is via the Bygard Tower. And this is the layout of the King's Chamber, and in particular the well shaft, because we know that the well would originally have come up all the way through the building and gone up to the mezzanine level, where servants would have had access to be able to then draw up water for use within the building. And this is a slightly more detailed image of how it will look with the well head that we're putting on at the mezzanine level, and the King's Chamber with the bed and one of the armoires. One of the elements that we're very keen to pursue wherever we can is the sorts of archaeologically and art historically attested features that you would have had in a building of the time. And we know that a key element of that was the way that space was divided up within medieval buildings. And so we're trying to demonstrate this by using different techniques, for instance, the hierarchy of different doors. So the more important the place, the room within the building, the more important the space, the more glorified your door and the door frame would be. And so we're choosing to try and portray this in the way that we have our doors. So you can see here in the black, the highest hierarchy, our type 1 or hierarchy 1 doors, which show the entrance into the Great Hall itself from the Bygard Tower, and the entrance into that sacrosanct area, the King's Chamber, from the Great Hall. And then a second tier of importance. So, for instance, from the Great Hall into the chapel, or from the King's Chamber into the chapel, which are shown in red, and the lower, more service-like doors, which are in blue. And we've got, again, good evidence for the sorts of decoration that they would have had. So from contemporary manuscripts, you can see that the ironwork was very decorative, but more than that, it was painted. And so that's, again, one of the things that we're going to have on our doors. It's a key thing that we're not making up what we're doing. All the time, this is academically driven by the best evidence that we have. So all of the things that we're doing within the keep can be academically justified. And that's really important, because what we're trying to do is make sure that this is not a make-believe royal palace, but it's actually based on the evidence that we have, the best evidence that we have. And this is something that our academic advisory board have been assisting us with. So, for instance, you can see in the right-hand manuscript illustration, the Liber Floridus, we've got not only very decorative ironwork, but we've got a door painted white. And to the sides of the walling at the bottom, there are blue doors. We have red or orange doors in the Old English hexateuch. So all of the things that we're doing are things that we can actually show existed in reality. And to do that, we're taking the design of genuine church doors. Now, the church door that you can see photographed at the top is Raveningham, which is a particularly good example where 12th century metalwork has survived very well. And it's a classic illustration of what we might think of as a medieval door. It's the bare wood now, but we know actually a lot of medieval doors when they were first built would have been covered in leather. And so the leather covering is again something that we're going to be doing for the top hierarchy in the Bygard Tower and in the King's Chamber to Great Hall, and that will be then painted. The other thing that we have is good archaeological evidence for high status ironwork being tinned, so that it had this wonderful silver look. So it's the look of ironwork before it then tarnishes. So that's again what we're doing. So one of the things that we really want to do is sort of challenge the preconception that what you see the photograph of there is what a medieval door looked like. It's only part of what a medieval door looked like. And of course, the problem that we have in creating our own medieval doors is that they have to align with modern fire safety standards. And it's not very easy to go out and buy a Norman fire door. So we had to get our very own one made up and then tested by burning it. And it was on the basis of the test results from that that we could prove to the fire officers that our solid oak doors were indeed sufficient to withstand a fire to give time for people to withdraw from the building. But this gives an example of what James Spedding, our blacksmith at the Holcombe Forge, has been doing. And in particular, you can see the typical technique of split curls at the end of C-scrolls and flat bars, and also the sorts of plaited ironwork that you've seen on the doors at places like Raveningham. And these are some of his test pieces. And on the basis of working out how he could make them, he got cracking, and you can see a number of the various hinges and decorative plates that are going to be going on our doors. And at the bottom is actually one of the latches that you see would have been turned on the other side of a doorknob. And that again is very well archaeologically attested from ironwork that has been found in archaeological excavation. So nothing that he is doing here is made up. It's all drawn from either surviving ironwork that has come through archaeology or is still standing on buildings. And that goes for things like this door handle and the decorative ironwork that is around it. And this is our interpretation of what the Raveningham church door would have looked like on the bits that have survived, and adapting it for use on the Bygard Tower. And the Bygard Tower door, as I mentioned, is going to be covered in leather, it's going to be painted, and this ironwork will then be tinned. So it's a very different idea to what people might have as their sort of preconception of a medieval door. And that's really important because it's those sorts of preconceptions that we want to challenge. And this isn't made up. It's all what we can see did exist once. And so these are the first of the doors actually going into the building, and they look rather handsome, and they certainly weigh an awful lot. I think this one was about a ton, which is why there needed to be a hoist to be able to help get it in on the pintles. There's no good having a fancy door if the door frame doesn't live up to the same sorts of treatment. And so we've done an awful lot of work on what those door frames could look like. And here you see a typical example of a relatively simple door frame from the Lazar House in Sproston, but the same sorts of roll moulding that you get in this Norman work in the photograph at the bottom. But because the inner lining of those door frames has to be of wood to be able to support the hinges, and because we're not building in genuine stone, we're creating a stone effect that can then be painted on and then lime washed in the same way. We've then worked with Stevenson's of Norwich, who are best known perhaps for their plaster covings, which they send out across the world. So we've stuck with a local business who are particularly well suited to make the sorts of door frame that we're looking for. And this is using a jesmonite resin. They've actually drawn up a design with us supervising the moldings and the types of scallop capital that you can see in the lower right photograph, which is exactly the same sort of scallop capital that we can actually see in the keep where it survives elsewhere. And so these door frames have also now started to go in. So on the left-hand side is the door that leads you from the Great Hall into that vestibule where you come across on the bridge. And the right-hand photograph shows the door entrance into the chapel from the King's Chamber. But we're not stopping there, because we know that within Norman buildings, they were also very keen on decorative paintwork. And these are examples that actually still survive at Kempley St Mary's in Gloucestershire. And it really gives you an idea about the sort of riot of colour, the polychromy that would have been used on the interior surfaces of a building. And we have to remember, this might look gaudy to us, particularly these highly intricate geometric patterns, but Norwich Castle was a royal palace. It was going to have the very highest finishes in exactly this sort of manner. And so that's the next sort of thing that we need to try to work on. And so this is a sketch drawn up by one of our academic advisory board of the sorts of scheme that you could have seen in Norwich Castle. Now, of course, we have absolutely no idea what it did look like, but we know from archaeological and standing buildings evidence that this is the sort of thing that would have been there. Now, we're not going to be able to do all of the really ornate stuff, certainly not at the beginning, but what we can do is set off a lot of those walls with the sort of redlining that you see on plain areas. So they didn't have this massive color absolutely everywhere, but they had redlining, and then you would add more ornate detail onto things like windows and door frames. And so we're going to have the sort of redlining, which we're now seeing trial pieces being done for us by the builders, and we're making our selection. And if you want to see what this sort of red lining looked like in reality, all you need to do is go along to the cathedral. And if you go around the east end there in the ambulatory, you will see similar examples still surviving. And it's interesting when you look at things like the chapel as well. So this is the arcading that survives with the windows built into it at the south wall in the chapel. But it reminds us how there was strict measurement that was done to help lay out the building. So the blind arcade, which is the sort of flat wall underneath an arch, is 46 inches wide. But if you then take the 11 inches of the column next to it and the gap for the window next to that to the left, which is 35 inches, you have 46 inches again, and the pattern replicates itself. So again, you have a very keen understanding of the use of proportion and particular measurements within the building. And you only need to look at the outside of that, which Sandy Heslop has shown was laid out on geometric proportions of 1 to the square root 2. And so we wanted to be able to reflect that in some way in our own designs to the interior. Now, we know that there was an interesting element to the north wall of the chapel, which is why the spine wall below it, which is, if you like, those two dungeon cells in the southeast corner, have a very wide wall between them, which must have supported a structure of masonry above it. And the argument has been that it's either a blind arcade or a fully pierced arcade. Because of the staircase on the other side of this wall for the fire escape, we're having to show it as a blind arcade. But I felt it was important to not just go along with metric measurements for this, but to actually convert our metric measurements into feet and inches and have some proportion to the way that that's laid out, whether that's in feet and inches or in perches, which is another of the Norman period measurements that was used, which feet and inches relate. And so I thought it would be interesting for you to see how we developed the design to try and make it as authentically driven as possible. So if you look at this was the original architect's draft layout, and then we subsequently changed it and changed it again until we'd got the sorts of proportions and units of measurement that might well have been used. So although we can't say this is exactly what it looked like, we know that this is really carefully worked out in the same way that they would have done in the original Norman building. And this is those arches now going in. So this is work that started last week, the end of last week. So it's bang up to date now. We're also, of course, very keen on ensuring that our furnishings are as authentically drawn as possible. So we're taking the idea of one of the king's thrones from manuscript evidence from the 12th century. You can actually see the sort of logical progression that we've worked through in drawing up our own design, which has then been made real by Stephen Beattie and me trying it out for size in the middle photograph. And the Queen's throne is likewise drawn from sculptural evidence in this particular case, with the Virgin sitting on a throne. And in this particular instance, you can see from Chartres-Loire that you've got the pierced sides. And this is again what we've done. And we know from surviving examples that sometimes these could have been made up with ivory panels. And so what we've done is not using genuine ivory, but a resin that even has grains laid into it, created the look of a pierced ivory paneled back to our throne. And it's important on any throne to, of course, have soft furnishings. And so the sorts of patterns that you can see in contemporary manuscripts of the soft pattern furnishings have been replicated by our wonderful textile volunteers. For example, this cushion, which has been deliberately made for the Queen's throne. We also have other sorts of chairs. And again, we have surviving examples as well as manuscript evidence for these sorts of X-stretcher chairs, which were a very, very common and popular type of chair to be used in the medieval period, because of course they could then be folded up, strapped to the back of your ass or donkey and carted off down the road to the next place that you're going to stay at. So you go and take your furnishings around the country with you when you're the king. And you can see again from the top left photograph, these sorts of animal head carvings, and you can see that again on the bottom left manuscript. So we know that what's drawn in the manuscripts is actually reflected in real things, and so that's what we've replicated again. And these again were made by Stephen Beattie for us. So while we can't say that Henry I would have had exactly that sort of chair, it's very, very likely that he would have had that sort of chair in the keep. And we've tried to make ours as accurate as possible. In this particular tub chair, we've used the theme of micro-architecture, but instead of painting it like most of our chairs, we've left this particular one natural wood, although we've gilded elements. And we know that gilding was a highly common use in furnishings like this, because it's one of the ways that you make it look more prestigious. And again, we've got our armoire, which is being developed from designs that we see in manuscript evidence. And again, we have decorative ironwork that will fix the doors onto it. And in place, you can see here behind the door, Andrew Ferrara, who is one of our project curators on the keep. And it really gives you an idea of just the size of some of these armoires, which is again reflecting the sort of scale that you see in the manuscript painting. No king's chamber would be complete without a bed, and we've got again very good evidence from manuscripts and sculpture for what the design of these sorts of beds would have looked like, and that's led us to draw up our own designs for a bed, and in particular in the central photograph you can see the sort of drop in the rail, almost like a cot gate, that allows you to climb into it more easily. And on the right hand you can see all the various elements made up for the bed. And in this photograph, or pair of photographs, you can see the reality. So this is our bed as it's now been made up, with blind arcading, fully pierced arcading around it. It's painted, it's gilded, And in the right-hand side, you can see Andrew and Agatha trying it out for size. One of the details that we're working on at the moment surrounds the light fittings that would have gone into an early 12th century building like this. And again, we've got very good evidence from things like manuscripts, to a lesser extent archaeology, the actual glass that would have been used and the sort of shape and design of these lanterns that would have held oil or animal fat with a wick coming out from it. And it would have been used for lighting those internal spaces being hung from walls. And here we are at Salt Glass at Sproston, where Max on the left-hand side is with us, and a very junior curator, looking at exemplars and how we try to work up through prototypes the design for that. And since then, he's actually created a series of prototypes, and we are about to now hopefully get him to make up a series of tinted glass finished products. It's very important to have our soft furnishings, and silk would have been one of those high status fabrics that would have been used in a royal palace. And we're very, very lucky that, because there's always been interest in the design and the feel and the beauty of silk, that people have always been interested in it. And there are a number of contemporary designs which we have small pieces of, and they have actually been reconstructed and woven through commercial silk weavers. There's a particular manufacturer in the Czech Republic that has done a lot of these. So we shall be using these sorts of 12th century designs and silk within the keep itself. But for other things, like this table runner, we've relied on our textile volunteers, and we're really pleased to have something like the runner that has been hand woven for us, which you can see on the right hand side here, which can go on the high table in the King's Chamber. We also know of other sorts of decorative designs that would have been put into things like banners that would have adorned internal spaces. So this is the St. Odo banner, which is, as you can see, almost exactly the same date as Norwich Castle Keep was constructed. So exactly the sort of thing one might expect to see placed within it. And one of the elements that we've been trying to do in our soft furnishings, or our tapestries and banners inside, is make sure that they not just have the style and the design that you would have found in the early 12th century, but actually the ideas behind it, the sort of conceit behind why you have a banner and what that banner might show. And if you're Henry I sitting on your throne in your new castle keep, you might well choose to have models of kingship on a banner. And of course, with our fantastic tapestry and textile volunteers, this has been created, and it shows the same sorts of models of kingship that you might choose to display. So if you're Henry, you're drawing attention to your father, William, at bottom right, and then working from right to left, you have Edward the King, last legitimate Anglo-Saxon King of England, because Harold didn't count in Norman eyes. Then Edmund, who is considered the national saint of England at the conquest. Charlemagne, the first imperial emperor in Western Europe after the Roman period. Constantine, who introduced Christianity. And then Augustus, the first Caesar. So all of these are the sorts of kings and emperors that you would want to see yourself as at the natural end of the line of. We also have the sorts of banners that you might want to have on either side of your throne, showing again your divine right to rule. So the triumph of good over evil, with the traditional emblem of evil, the dragon being shown slain by a knight on the left-hand side, and the triumph of the wisdom of Solomon, a model for just kingship, shown on the right-hand side. And again, what we're doing here is trying to take actual examples of artwork and apply them in the layout and design of these banners, which have been put together by Agatha Gomolka, our assistant project curator here. And this gives you an idea of the applique work that has gone into making those two banners, and a sneak peek at the nearly finished Wisdom of Solomon. There are other sorts of tapestries and banners. So, for instance, we know that things like the Labours of the Month or the Zodiac or Beasts of Fantasy were very popular, not just in woodwork and probably leatherwork and metalwork, but in textiles as well. So this is the Girona tapestry. And so we have got our own version of it. And again, all of the designs here drawn up by Agatha reflect actual manuscript and illustrative material that we have from the period. And they look absolutely fantastic. So we have spring with a lady going hawking, and autumn with panage under the trees, and then a representation of the sun bottom. And they need to be the size they are, which is 1.5 by 1.5 meters, because the keep is a large space. And as you can see, we have Agatha leaning out, uh, hanging the one-to-one design for the models of Kingship banner, and superimposed, we have those other 3 banner designs that are currently being worked on, actually showing their scale in the keep itself. And it gives you an idea that you really need something really quite big and bold to be able to decorate a big space like the Great Hall appropriately. And then finally, of course, there's that other textile from the period that's very well known, the Bayeux tapestry, which has been the inspiration for us to have our own tapestry, which is, of course, the missing bit at the end of the Bayeux tapestry. And it's the continuation showing how William has divine right to rule England and thus was able to put down the rebellions of Hereward the Wake and the 3 earls in 1075. And this has been drawn up as a cartoon using the Bayeux tapestry as a model by local artist Fiona Gowan, and then brought into reality by our textile and tapestry volunteers. And here you can see Nick Ravenscroft, who's been masterminding the work on the tapestry, and myself unrolling the first story. The overall tapestry is going to be 19 meters long, but you'll be able to work your way through the whole story using a touchscreen desk in the King's Chamber, and that will take you through a translation of the Latin, an explanation of the stories, further details about certain aspects of the story or details of objects within the tapestry, and then it will also enable you to meet the people behind all of the textiles and show you them. So that's what I want to end with, because I think that with, I think it's something like 28,000 hours of volunteer time, that's the same as working 24 hours a day non-stop for, I think it's 3 years that I worked out, 3 or 4 years. It's an enormous contribution to this project, and I think it will really make the difference between a good project and what is going to be a great project. And it also, I think, hope shows the sorts of local buy-in that we've been privileged to receive as part of the project. This is all about the community and enabling a space for locals and for visitors to come into and see. And I don't think anything sums this up better than the work that we've had from our fantastic volunteers. But it also gives you an idea of the lengths to which we've been going and striving for authenticity in everything that we're producing. And that, I think, is what's going to make the difference for this project. So I'll end there. Thanks very much.